in the sweltering summer of 1867, far from the bustle of Missouri's growing towns, a quiet farming settlement near Sedalia became the backdrop for one of the most unsettling medical mysteries ever recorded in the Midwest. At the center of it was an 8-year-old boy named Timothy Caldwell. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only trained physician for miles, kept 3 thick journals filled with notes about this child, observations that seemed to challenge every accepted truth about human behavior. In the 19th century, to strangers, Timothy appeared harmless, even endearing. But those who spent more time around him would come to realize there was something in the boy that defied explanation. Over the course of just 6 months, 3 adults perished in unusual accidents, while countless livestock across the county turned up lifeless under mysterious conditions. 11 townsfolk, each of whom had crossed paths with young Timothy, would not live to see the following year. Officials quietly sealed the records, locking them away for over a century. But the truth about Timothy Caldwell still lingers, raising chilling questions about how early the seeds of evil can take root in a child. Before we unravel the dark tale of Sedalia's most infamous boy, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into America's forgotten horrors. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from mystery seekers everywhere. The story of Timothy's shadowed legacy didn't begin with violence, it began with grief. Missouri in 1867 was still scarred by the Civil War. Towns like Sedalia had buried fathers, brothers, and sons, leaving families broken and farms abandoned. The Caldwell homestead, 15 miles south of town, had once thrived with cattle and corn. But James Caldwell fell at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861, and his widow Martha struggled to keep the land until consumption took her life in the bitter winter of 1865. Their eldest son, Thomas, inherited the farm, but not the strength to sustain it. When news arrived that his brother William had perished at Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and an 8-year-old boy, Thomas saw both a responsibility and a solution. The child, Timothy, needed shelter, and Thomas needed another pair of hands in the fields. Thomas was a hardened man, weathered by grief and war, and his wife, Sarah, carried her own sharp edges, shaped by years of childlessness and disappointment. Neither had the warmth or patience to raise a boy. Yet, in the spring of 1866, Timothy arrived on their doorstep, carrying a cloth sack and eyes that seemed much too ancient for his young face. He was a pale, slight child, easily burned by the sun, with thin blonde hair that Sarah kept cropped short. When asked about his past, he offered only fragments: a father who was a soldier, a mother who coughed blood, nights spent with neighbors after her death. What most adults noticed was his impeccable manners. He never raised his voice, never complained, never argued, always replying with a polite "yes, sir," or "yes, ma'am." Dr. Harding first met Timothy that June, when the boy accompanied his uncle into town. Having treated countless soldiers, Harding had developed a talent for reading character, but something about this boy unsettled him. Timothy looked him square in the eye, spoke clearly, and sat perfectly still, without the fidgeting or hesitation one expects of children. Harding later wrote, "The boy was polite and composed, yet I felt as if I were the one being studied." Neighbors began to notice strange things too. Eleanor Patterson, who lived beside the Caldwells, often saw Timothy working in the fields. He never seemed to rest or grow tired like a machine set to a task. Stranger still, her chickens grew, frantic whenever he drew near, huddling together and refusing to cross the fence line. Eleanor couldn't explain it, but she felt the animals sensed something humans did not. The first death came in August 1866. Little Mary Fletcher, just 5 years old, wandered near Willow Creek, a shallow stream cutting through several farms. It was Timothy who brought the news to her family. His clothes were damp, his face pale, but his voice calm. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said evenly, "I found Mary by the creek. She isn't breathing." Searchers found the child face down in water scarcely knee-deep. Dr. Harding ruled it a drowning tragic, but not uncommon. Yet he was troubled by Timothy's exactness. He described Mary's position, the way her dress clung to her, every detail too precise for a child who claimed to have stumbled upon her body. When questioned about why he happened to be in that very place at that very moment, Timothy explained that he had been searching for a calf that had gone missing. His account was unusually precise for a boy his age. Dr. Harding noted in his journal, but Timothy could describe, in almost unnerving detail, the exact position of Mary Fletcher's body, the way her limbs were arranged, how her dress had snagged on a branch beneath the surface, even the tint of the water near her face. Such clarity seemed strange in a child who claimed to have been shocked and frightened by what he had seen. Thomas Caldwell confirmed Timothy's explanation. One of their calves had indeed disappeared earlier that morning, and he had sent the boy to check the creek. Oddly, the calf turned up 2 days later, unharmed, grazing in a meadow nearly a mile from the drowning site. The grief-stricken Fletcher family received Timothy's condolences with gratitude. After all, it was he who had discovered Mary and raised the alarm. At her funeral, he sat quietly beside his aunt and uncle, head bowed in solemn respect. When the family thanked him for acting so quickly, Timothy replied with practiced sorrow, "I only wish I could have found her sooner," he told Mary's father, his voice heavy with regret. But not everyone was convinced. From across the church, Elelania Patterson observed something unsettling. When Mary's mother collapsed in anguish, when hardened men broke into tears at the sight of the tiny coffin, Timothy's face never shifted. His head remained bowed as if in mourning. Yet, when he thought himself unobserved, his pale blue eyes stayed dry, scanning every detail of the room with a cold attentiveness. 3 weeks later, another tragedy struck. Henrik Larsen, an elderly Norwegian immigrant and retired logger, was discovered dead at the bottom of Devil's Bluff, a jagged, 40-foot cliff overlooking the same creek where Mary had drowned. Though his joints were stiff with arthritis, Henrik often climbed the bluff to tend to wild beehives he had long cared for. Once again, Timothy was the one to find the body. Returning home from town, he told onlookers he had noticed Larsson's hat snagged on a thorn bush. When the old man failed to answer his calls, Timothy climbed down and found him lifeless, his neck broken in the fall. Dr. Harding's examination confirmed death had been immediate. The only oddity was the cluster of dead bees scattered around the corpse, far more than one would normally expect, so far from any hive. Henrik knew those bluffs like the back of his hand. Samuel Patterson remarked to Dr. Harding afterward, 3 years climbing up there and never a slip. Makes no sense he'd fall now. Timothy, when asked, offered an explanation. Perhaps, he suggested, the bees had stung Henrik and caused him to lose balance. He was always saying how mean they get if you disturb them. Maybe they swarmed, dim, and he panicked. Though plausible, Harding found the details troubling. The bees' bodies were concentrated entirely around the site of impact. If Henrik had truly disturbed a hive at the top, there should have been signs of their agitation along the fall path. Yet the hives at the cliff's edge were intact and undisturbed, the bees calm and busy with their usual work among the late summer flowers. The third death left no room for chance. In September 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing near his family's cabin. After 4 days of desperate searching, his body was found in an abandoned well, nearly half a mile from where he'd last been seen. Timothy had eagerly joined the search party, tirelessly combing the woods for 3 days, with a determination unusual for a child. His knowledge of the forest was astonishing. He guided even seasoned locals through rough, unfamiliar terrain. When asked how he had learned the woods so thoroughly, Timothy explained that he often explored them to gather herbs and plants his aunt used for food and medicine. At dawn on the 4th day, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin, weary and solemn. "I think I found something," he told Jacob's father. He led them to a collapsed well hidden by fallen logs and overgrown brush. From inside came faint cries. Jacob was alive at the bottom, but barely clinging to life after days without water or food. Dr. Harding rushed to the scene. Yet, despite their efforts, the boy succumbed within hours of being pulled out. His frail body simply could not recover from the ordeal, Harding later recorded in his journal. The boy must have endured nearly 4 days in that pit. That Timothy Caldwell located him in such an obscure and concealed place raises disturbing questions. How deeply does this child know the land? What other hidden places might he be aware of? Even more disquieting was Timothy's demeanor as Jacob lay dying. While the family wept and prayed over the fading child, Timothy sat in the corner, lips moving as though in prayer. But Harding, watching carefully, realized Timothy was not praying. His eyes locked on Jacob with an intensity Harding could only describe as clinical. He seemed to be studying, cataloguing the boy's every labored breath, the pallor of his skin, the flickering of his consciousness. When Jacob finally slipped away, Timothy betrayed no sorrow, only an expression Harding would later admit looked like satisfaction. After the funeral, unable to let the matter rest, Harding visited the abandoned well himself. The sight left him uneasy. Concealed by fallen debris and dense growth, it was so well hidden that uncovering it would have required considerable effort. Something about it gnawed at him, though he could not yet say why. Though Timothy claimed he had heard the sound of crying from the well, such a claim seemed highly unlikely. The shaft was too deep, and the surrounding brush too thick for any sound to have escaped. When Dr. Harding inspected the area more carefully, he noticed something the rescuers had overlooked in their rush to save Jacob Mills. The debris around the well was not random. Branches and logs had been placed with such precision that the opening appeared naturally hidden, yet carefully disguised by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The implication was chilling. Jacob had not merely fallen in by accident. Someone had deliberately put him there, and then concealed the sight until he was too weak to be saved. Harding could not voice this suspicion aloud, but the thought gnawed at him. That evening he began a private journal devoted solely to Timothy Caldwell. If his instincts were correct, the boy represented a grave threat to the community, but Harding faced a problem suspicion was not proof. Outwardly, Timothy was the picture of good behavior. He attended church every Sunday with his guardians, sat quietly through sermons, and recited prayers with solemn respect. On the farm, he performed tasks that tested even grown men, and he carried them out without complaint. He was courteous to elders, obedient to authority, and, most troubling, Prévost, who always had a perfectly reasonable explanation for his presence at each misfortune. He had been searching for a missing calf when he found Mary Fletcher's body. He had been returning from town when he noticed Henrik Lenn's hat. He had joined the search for Jacob Mills, just as any concerned boy might have. Yet Harding's medical training had sharpened his ability to see beyond appearances. During the war, he had treated soldiers whose relationship to killing went far deeper than duty. In such men, he had noticed a particular coldness and absence of natural empathy, an almost clinical interest in pain and death. They displayed too little shock at suffering, sometimes even too much fascination with it. Timothy Caldwell, disturbingly, showed these same traits condensed into the form of an 8-year-old child. By October 1866, Harding's quiet investigation was fully underway. Using his role as the community doctor, he made routine calls to farms and households, under the guise of monitoring families still weakened by the war years. In reality, he was collecting observations about Timothy. What he uncovered was unsettling. Farms near the Caldwell property were plagued with strange misfortunes. Livestock died not from sickness, but from suspicious injuries. Chickens were found each morning with cleanly broken necks, supposedly the work of foxes, though no tracks or other signs of predators were ever discovered. Pigs developed wounds that became fatally infected. Horses suddenly went lame. A neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, confided that she had lost 17 hens in just 2 months. "It doesn't make sense," she told Harding. "Always 1 or 2 at a time, and always in the morning." My husband says foxes, but there's never a fox sign, and the way their necks are snapped to clean, to exact. When Harding examined the remains himself, the evidence matched her suspicions. The force had been applied with precision, striking specific points in the neck as though performed by someone with knowledge of anatomy. This was not the sloppy chaos of a predator, but an act of deliberate control. Other farms showed similar patterns. James Wickham had lost calves in bizarre accidents, supposedly strangling on ropes or trapping their heads in fences in ways that defied reason. Robert Dunham's prized bull had collapsed into a ditch and broken its leg, despite being known for sure-footedness. Every farm affected lay within walking distance of the Caldwells. More than once, neighbors reported seeing Timothy nearby. I saw him along our fence the morning before we found the calf, Wickham remarked. Seemed odd, him being so far from his own land. But the boy was polite-waved, and greeted me proper, like he'd been taught. Harding also sharpened his observations during medical visits to the Caldwell household. Timothy was always present, quietly watching as Harding tended to his aunt and uncle. What disturbed the doctor most was the boy's interest in anatomy. Timothy asked about procedures and injuries, far beyond what a child should understand. Once, with an almost casual tone, he inquired, "How do you know when someone's really dead? Sometimes people just look like they're sleeping." When Harding asked why he wanted to know, Timothy explained that his uncle had told him he must be prepared for emergencies on the farm, since they lived so far from town. The reasoning seemed plausible, but the manner of his curiosity unsettled Harding deeply. Timothy did not ask like a frightened child. He questioned like a student dissecting a corpse. He wanted to know how long death took, what signs to watch for, what injuries people might survive. Harding noticed that Timothy absorbed these answers with flawless recall to test him. The doctor began slipping false information into their conversations, saying that certain wounds were fatal when they were not, or that certain symptoms pointed to the wrong condition. Timothy never corrected him aloud, but Harding could see, with growing unease, that the boy stored every detail carefully, remembering even the lies. Dr. Harding had grown increasingly disturbed by Timothy's revelations, maybe even earlier. The boy said thoughtfully, "I began with insects, then moved on to mice, then larger animals. I wanted to see how they reacted to pain later. I tried the same with people. They're not so different except people understand what's happening to them. That makes it more fascinating." A cold wave ran through Harding that had nothing to do with the November wind. "And what do you plan to do now?" he asked cautiously. Timothy considered the question, his pale eyes narrowing. "I need to know what happens when you hurt someone. Who trusts you completely? Someone who wouldn't suspect until it was too late." The meaning was unmistakable. Timothy intended to kill his aunt and uncle. Harding realized he had little time, perhaps only hours, before the boy acted. That evening he rode into Sedalia and sought out Sheriff William Crawford, a hardened veteran of the Union Army. Crawford was practical, skeptical, but he respected Harding's judgment. The doctor presented the evidence carefully: Timothy's drawings from the cave, the suspicious deaths surrounding him, his unnatural knowledge of wounds and anatomy, and finally, the boy's open admission of wanting to kill his guardians. Crawford studied the sketches with unease. "You can't put a child in irons for scribbles and suspicions," he said grimly. "But this we can't ignore. We'll keep watch, and if he moves, we'll be ready." Together, they formed a plan. Harding would visit the Caldwell home, as usual, under the guise of treating Thomas's chronic pain. In truth, the doctor intended to keep both Thomas and Sarah sedated, so they would be harder for Timothy to harm. Meanwhile, Crawford and a handful of trusted deputies' men, who had followed him through the war, would hide around the property, close enough to intervene, but far enough not to alert the boy. The next morning, Harding drove his buggy toward the Caldwell farm. The moment he arrived, he sensed something was wrong. The yard was unnervingly quiet. No chickens scratching in the dirt, no pigs in their pens. The silence pressed on him like a warning. Then Timothy appeared in the doorway, standing motionless, his cold eyes following Harding with predatory calm. His sleeves were rolled high, his hands scrubbed raw, as though preparing for something messy. "Good morning, Doctor," Timothy greeted politely, though his voice carried a strange anticipation. "I've been waiting for you." Inside, Harding found Thomas and Sarah lying in their bed. At first glance, they looked asleep, but something was wrong. Their skin was pale, their breathing shallow. "What did you give them?" Harding asked without turning. "Just herbs I gathered in the woods," Timothy answered lightly. "This land grows all kinds of useful things." The doctor checked pulses, weak but steady. Timothy had been careful with the dosage. He wanted them helpless, not dead. "They won't wake for hours," the boy continued, almost cheerfully. "That gives us plenty of time to talk." What followed chilled Harding more than anything he had ever heard. Timothy spoke of murder and suffering as though he were lecturing on science. He described how he tested different methods, what he observed, what he learned. "Mary Fletcher taught me that drowning takes much longer than people think," Timothy said matter-of-factly. "They struggle, gasp, fight, but it takes minutes before they finally stop. She was small, but she fought harder than I expected. I held her down for nearly 3 minutes before she went still." Harding felt the blood drain from his face. "Held her under the water yourself?" he whispered. Timothy nodded eagerly. "She trusted me. I told her there was a shiny stone at the bottom of the creek. When she bent over, I pushed her head down. It didn't take much strength, but I learned something important, that day humans cling to life much more desperately than animals." Henrik Larsson had been a far trickier challenge, Timothy explained with quiet satisfaction. He admitted he could not overpower the man in a direct fight, so he needed a more inventive solution. Knowing Henrik inspected his beehives every Thursday, Timothy prepared the ground the night before by loosening stones near the cliff's edge. Then he carefully collected bees in a cloth sack from one of the hives. When Mr. Larson arrived, Timothy recounted, his eyes glinting. "I hid behind some rocks looks. I hurled the bag at his face and shouted that a massive swarm was attacking him. Panicked, Henrik stumbled backward, stepping onto the weakened section of the bluff. As Timothy had calculated, the stones gave way, and the fall killed him instantly. Jacob Mills, Timothy continued, had been the most fascinating case of all. Unlike the others, he wasn't killed swiftly. Timothy wanted to witness what happened when death came slowly. He lured Jacob into the woods with a story about a family of baby raccoons. Concerned for the imagined animals, Jacob followed willingly. Timothy helped him descend into an old well, then concealed the opening with logs and brush. For 4 days, Timothy returned with only enough water to keep him alive, but not strong, observing his slow decline like a doctor watching an experiment unfold. Dr. Harding, listening with growing horror, realized Timothy was no longer speaking about theoretical ideas. These were detailed confessions. The physician asked carefully, "What are you planning to do with your aunt and uncle?" Timothy's smile spread wider and more genuine than ever before. "That's where you come in, Doctor. All my other subjects never understood what was happening until the end. But you," he gestured, "you know exactly what I am. That makes you the perfect candidate for a new kind of test." As he spoke, Timothy gathered objects from around the room: rope from the barn, a heavy candlestick, sharp knives from the kitchen. He laid them out in neat order, as though preparing surgical tools. His voice grew almost gleeful. "I want to discover what someone does when they know death is coming. Will you sacrifice yourself for Thomas and Sarah? Will you fight me, even knowing I've accounted for that? Or will you run and abandon them?" Harding recognized that time for talk was over. He pulled a Navy Colt revolver from his medical bag, unleveled it at the boy. "Step away from those knives, Timothy." Rather than fear, Timothy showed curiosity. "A Colt Navy, isn't it? 6 shots." The doctor nodded before realizing the mistake. Timothy tilted his head. "And how many people are you trying to protect?" "Let me count. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Sarah, yourself, and the 3 officers outside. 6 bullets, 6 people. Interesting." The boy edged closer, his tone shifting to something hypnotic. "You want to know why I am the way I am. If I was born like this soulmate, if there are others like me, you want to understand how to spot us before we begin our work." Each observation was unsettlingly accurate, striking at Harding's scientific curiosity, even in this moment of terror. Then Timothy moved toward his sleeping uncle, rope in hand. Harding lunged to stop him, but Timothy was shockingly fast. With a hidden knife, he slashed at the doctor's arm, and a vicious struggle broke out. The boy fought like a cornered predator, precise and clearly practiced. Harding forced one blade from his grip, only for Timothy to pull another from his clothing. It became obvious he had hidden weapons throughout the house in advance. The noise of the fight alerted Sheriff Crawford and his deputies, who rushed in through the back door. They found Harding grappling with Timothy, while Thomas and Sarah Caldwell lay unconscious in their bed, unaware of the chaos. Deputy Mitchell managed to subdue the boy, while Harding, bleeding but alive, checked on the couple. Timothy sat calmly afterward, ropes binding his wrists. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with blood, but his pale blue eyes remained unnervingly sharp. "You can't prove anything," he said coolly. "No one will ever believe a child did all this." Sheriff Crawford glared down at him. "Maybe not, but trying to kill your own family is more than enough to put you away." Timothy only smiled. "You won't hang me. I'm too young and too valuable. Someone will want to study me." Banned. So, just when it seemed the nightmare in Sedalia County had reached its end, the horror only deepened. If this story has left you unsettled, share it with a friend who enjoys dark mysteries. Tap the like button to support us, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss chilling tales like this one. Timothy Caldwell had misjudged his destiny, though he had been correct in assuming that proving his crimes would be nearly impossible. When Sheriff Crawford attempted to present the discoveries from the cave to county prosecutors, he faced precisely the kind of resistance Dr. Harding had warned about. The sketches and notes were dismissed as nothing more than the expressions of a traumatized child coping with the deaths of his parents. The strange string of accidents and fatalities was explained away as coincidence, made more suspicious only because Timothy had a habit of appearing helpful in times of crisis. Yet one event could not be rationalized: the attempted murder of Thomas and Sarah Caldwell. 3 officers of the law had witnessed Timothy attacking his sleeping relatives with a knife, leaving little room for alternative explanations. Even those inclined to pity the boy could not deny that for an 8-year-old to strike at family members in such a way suggested a profound flaw in his nature. In 1867, Missouri's courts had no precedent for dealing with a child who was both too young for adult prosecution and too violent for placement in an orphanage or reform institution. Timothy's case became a legal and medical puzzle that drew attention from scholars across the state and beyond. After weeks of debate and consultation with physicians and legal minds from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, a compromise emerged. Timothy would be committed to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton. There, alienists, considered among the most advanced in the region, would study and attempt to treat him. The decision left no party satisfied. Prosecutors still pressed for an adult trial on charges of murder, while the defense argued no child so young could truly be culpable. Medical voices were split between those who hoped Timothy might be rehabilitated and those who judged him beyond recovery. Dr. Samuel Harding offered to accompany the boy to the institution, where he remained for 3 months, closely documenting Timothy's behavior and working alongside the hospital's staff. The material he produced became one of the earliest systematic examinations of antisocial traits in children, though it would not be published until decades later. Within the hospital, Timothy adjusted quickly. As on the farm, he showed a sharp, calculating intelligence, learning how to mirror the emotions and mannerisms expected of him. Many staff members believed he was making extraordinary progress. Timothy wept convincingly when speaking of his misdeeds, expressed seemingly heartfelt remorse, and showed what appeared to be genuine gratitude toward his caretakers. But Harding observed that Timothy was not feeling any of these emotions, was studying others with clinical precision and mimicking their behavior for effect. In his detailed notes, Harding wrote, "The subject possesses extraordinary mental capacity, yet shows no trace of authentic emotional experience. He can simulate normal feelings well enough to fool casual observers, but under prolonged scrutiny the performance collapses." Harding noted that Timothy's understanding of emotions was purely functional. Happiness, to him, meant the face people make when they want something good to continue, while sadness was the face people wear when they need others to help them. He had never truly experienced either state, believing he had won Harding's trust. Timothy began to reveal the darker side of his imagination, pretending to be enthralled by scientific inquiry. He confided elaborate plans for experiments that far exceeded the cruelty of his earlier acts. Harding's private reports noted, "He has devised complex scenarios for testing human reactions under physical and psychological torment. The creativity, detail, and psychological insight behind these fantasies are alarming. Given time and resources, he could become one of the most dangerous individuals America has ever produced." Hospital records indicate Timothy remained there for a year and a half. During that period, a series of unexplained incidents occurred, many resembling his earlier methods. Several patients died in ways that looked natural or accidental at first glance, but under closer study suggested deliberate orchestration. 3. Elderly inmates, all previously in stable health, died suddenly of apparent heart failure after contact with Timothy. 2 younger patients suffered accidental falls leading to serious injuries, though each fall happened in places Timothy had visited earlier. Even more unsettling were reports from patients who claimed Timothy appeared in their rooms at night, be standing silently beside their beds as they slept. Staff, too, began showing signs of unease. Nurses who spent long hours with Timothy reported recurring nightmares filled with vivid images of violence. 2 attendants requested transfers, insisting that they felt perpetually watched even when Timothy was supposed to be locked in his quarters. Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, a physician brought in for her expertise in new European psychiatric methods, eventually uncovered one of Timothy's deceptions. He had persuaded a nurse to supply him with paper and pencil under the guise of therapeutic journaling. The notebook he produced seemed to contain exactly what he had promised: childlike entries describing sorrow, regret, and a desire for healing. 2 casual eyes. It portrayed a damaged but redeemable child struggling to recover from tragedy. But Fitzgerald's training included familiarity with coded writing systems, and she suspected there was more hidden in Timothy's journal than met the eye. When Dr. Harding applied analytical techniques to Timothy Caldwell's journal, she uncovered something chilling. The child's seemingly innocent diary entries were actually encoded with an advanced cipher. Once deciphered, the messages revealed Timothy's true mindset: cold, calculating, and devoid of remorse. rather than seeking rehabilitation. Timothy was methodically studying the asylum itself, doctors, guards, daily routines, and weaknesses. His intention wasn't simply to escape, but to use his confinement as training ground for more refined methods of manipulation and killing. One decoded passage. Read Day 47. Dr. F is convinced my tears were genuine. Her response shows increasing by sympathy and lowered suspicion. At this rate, I estimate 3 more weeks before I earn enough trust to initiate physical contact during sessions. This revelation caused the hospital to restrict his privileges immediately and enforce stricter security. Yet Timothy adjusted quickly. Instead of emotional manipulation, he focused on mapping schedules, procedures, and possible escape routes. In the summer of 1868, the unimaginable happened. Timothy Caldwell vanished from the Missouri State Hospital. The official explanation claimed he slipped away during a building transfer despite constant guard supervision. But Dr. Harding doubted this. Based on years of observation, he believed Timothy's escape was not a lucky chance, but the result of months of intricate planning. Later evidence supported this suspicion. Guards admitted they had granted Timothy small, harmless exceptions in his routine. A few extra minutes outside, additional books to read, slight adjustments to his schedule. Individually, these seemed insignificant, but together they formed the perfect cover for escape. As Dr. Harding noted, he spent a year and a half dissecting the minds of everyone around him. By the time he acted, he knew the staff better than they knew themselves. His breakout was not desperation, it was strategy fulfilled. After Timothy's disappearance, unsettling reports began to surface across the Midwest. Fatal accidents, staged with eerie precision. Signs of animal torture, a strangely mature, helpful child seen near tragedies. Harding feared Timothy had grown more dangerous. Now older and physically stronger, he could overpower adults while avoiding the mistakes that led to his capture as a child. Keir's intelligence, paired with absolute lack of conscience, had created something unprecedented in criminal history. Harding spent the remainder of his life tracking these mysterious cases, compiling hundreds of pages of notes and theories. His private journals, later found after his death in 1891, contained detailed records of incidents that could be linked to Timothy, along with grim reflections on the nature of evil itself. In one haunting conclusion, Harding wrote, "Timothy was not an anomaly. He was a window into what humanity might become without morality. If he lived into adulthood, then somewhere in America there walks a man who understands psychology better than any professional, who manipulates others with terrifying ease, and who regards humanity as nothing more than subjects for experimentation." The Caldwell farm itself was abandoned after Timothy's arrest. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell could not endure living where they had unknowingly sheltered a killer. The land passed back to the county, then sold to developers decades later, though locals whispered that the place was cursed. The cave Timothy once used for his experiments was sealed by Sheriff Crawford. but stories about its darkness persisted for generations. Dr. Harding's journals were eventually donated in 1923 to the Missouri Historical Society by his daughter. Though disturbing, she believed their academic value outweighed their horror. Even today, they remain available to qualified researchers. As for Thomas and Sarah, both lived under assumed identities, haunted by the possibility that Timothy might return for them. Neither had children. Sarah died in 1889 and Thomas in 1894. Final journal entry, penned days before his death, still resonates. Evil can wear the mask of innocence. Timothy Caldwell forced us to question everything we believe about childhood morality, and whether some are born beyond redemption. The case continues to disturb historians, psychologists, and true crime enthusiasts alike. Was everything revealed? Did Timothy Caldwell's story extend far beyond the official records? What do you think? Could Timothy have survived into adulthood, continuing his experiments under a new identity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this unsettling tale, remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves deep, dark mysteries. History still hides secrets that prove truth is often more terrifying than fiction.